Some spider crabs cover their entire body with living stinging anemones, sharp bits of coral and toxic algae piece by piece, until the crab underneath completely disappears. What's left behind isn't really a crab anymore, at least not to anything looking at it. It's a moving clump of dangerous, unpleasant material several times the size of the actual animal hiding underneath it. And any predator that decides to attack it is in for a painful surprise. This is one of the strangest defense systems found anywhere in the ocean, and it belongs to a group of animals commonly called decorator crabs, most of which are a type of spider crab. Instead of relying on speed, a hard shell, or sharp claws to survive, these crabs build their own personal armor out of whatever dangerous or well-camouflaged material happens to be nearby. So how does a slow-moving crab manage to construct something like this, and why go through all that effort instead of just growing a tougher shell? Let's start with how the crab actually attaches all of this material in the first place, because the crab isn't gluing things on or weaving anything together the way you might expect. Across its shell, a decorator crab is covered in tiny, curved, hook-like bristles called setae. These setae work almost like tiny pieces of natural Velcro. When the crab picks up a piece of algae, a small sponge, or even a live, stinging anemone using its claws, it presses that material directly onto its shell, where the hooked bristles grab and hold it firmly in place. The crab is remarkably selective about what it picks up too. Rather than randomly grabbing anything nearby, many decorator crab species show a clear preference for materials that offer some kind of real advantage, either by blending in almost perfectly with their surrounding environment, or by carrying an active chemical or physical defense of their own. Toxic or bad-tasting algae, sharp bits of debris, and especially live-stinging anemones are common favorites, since attaching something that can actively harm a predator provides a much stronger defense than simple camouflage alone. This is where the idea of building a trap really comes into play. An anemone attached to a crab shell isn't just sitting there passively. It's still alive, still capable of firing its stinging cells at anything that touches it, exactly the same way it would if it were still anchored to a rock on the seafloor. A fish or other predator that grabs what looks like a harmless clump of reef debris can suddenly find itself facing a painful sting instead of an easy meal. The crab essentially builds a defensive structure that actively punishes anything that attacks it, without needing to fight back using its own body at all. Remarkably, this isn't a one-time decoration either. Many decorator crabs actively maintain their collection of attached material over time, and in the case of live anemones, some species appear to keep them alive and healthy for extended periods, essentially caring for a mobile garden of stinging defenses that travels wherever the crab goes. Researchers studying this relationship have found that in some cases, the anemone may benefit from this arrangement too, getting carried to new feeding locations it could never reach on its own, and picking up small scraps of food the crab leaves behind during meals. This kind of mutual arrangement, where both animals get something useful out of living together, is called a symbiotic relationship, and it turns what looks like a simple defense trick into an ongoing partnership between two completely different species. There's a real cost to building and maintaining a defense system this elaborate, and it comes down to molting. Like all crabs, decorator crabs need to periodically shed their old shell as they grow, replacing it with a larger new one underneath. This creates an obvious problem for an animal covered in carefully attached decorations, since all of that material stays attached to the old shell and gets left behind the moment the crab molts. Rather than losing their disguise permanently, decorator crabs typically respond by immediately picking up new material from their surroundings after each molt, essentially rebuilding their entire defensive coat from scratch every single time they grow. This is a significant ongoing investment of time and effort, repeated again and again throughout the crab's life, simply to maintain the exact same level of protection it had before. So why would an animal go through all of this trouble repeatedly instead of just relying on a stronger natural shell the way many other crab species do. Spider crabs in general tend to have thinner, less heavily armoured shells compared to some other crab families, making this kind of external, borrowed defence especially valuable for them specifically. Building a defence out of borrowed, replaceable material also gives these crabs enormous flexibility. A crab living on a rocky reef can decorate itself with materials that blend into rock and coral. A crab living in a bed of seaweed can cover itself in matching algae instead. Rather than being locked into one fixed type of camouflage or defence the way a crab with a permanently coloured shell would be, a decorator crab can completely change its disguise and its defences simply by picking up different material, adapting to whatever environment it happens to be living in at the time. This behaviour also helps explain why some spider crab species can end up looking dramatically different from one individual to the next, even within the exact same species living in the exact same reef. Since each crab decorates itself using whatever material it happens to find and prefer, no two decorated crabs typically end up looking identical, even if they're built on the exact same basic body underneath. A predator that learns to recognize one specific pattern of decoration on one crab gains very little advantage in spotting the next one, since that next crab might be covered in a completely different combination of algae, sponge, or stinging anemone. This natural variation adds yet another layer of protection on top of the camouflage and stinging defense itself, making it even harder for predators to develop a reliable, repeatable way of picking these crabs out from their surroundings. Put all of this together and the decorator crab turns out to be one of the most resourceful builders in the entire ocean, constructing an actively defended, constantly changing suit of camouflage and armour using nothing but a handful of tiny hooked bristles and whatever dangerous material happens to be lying around nearby. It isn't relying on its own body to stay safe at all. It's relying on borrowed danger, carefully arranged, worn like a living stinging coat that's often several times the size of the small, unarmoured crab quietly hiding underneath it,